Hey, what's up you guys, The Curious Owl here, and today I'm going to be sharing my thoughts on the novel Revival by Stephen King. This was my November TBR pick in 2018, and I finally got around to finishing it before the Buy It Nobiliathon. And to be completely honest, I had some high hopes for this, and it kind of fell flat. The main story of this is basically a life's journey following the character Jamie Morton as he is growing up and experiences a lot of different things based on certain events that happen in his childhood. To give a lot of context, because there's a lot that's involved with the story, Jamie, when he's 5 years old, witnesses the moving in of a new family into his little town in Maine. The family consists of a man that is a reverend that is going to be taking over the church in their town named Charles Jacobs, his wife, and his little boy. As Jamie grows up with Reverend Jacobs in his church, things start to go really well and things are going great. But after a couple of years, unfortunately, Reverend Charles Jacobs, his wife and son, get into a car accident and they are killed pretty much on impact. And because of that, Charles goes through a really devastating loss of faith. He completely denounces his faith in the middle of a service in what they call the terrible sermon. Following that event, Charles moves away from this town and Jamie basically grows up afterwards. And the entirety of the story is pretty much you witnessing Jamie growing up into adulthood and meeting Charles Jacobs again in his late 30s after being addicted to heroin for a long time and becoming a pretty successful guitarist. And then again, much later in time when Jamie is in his 50s and then meets Charles because there is a certain person from Jamie's life that is sick and dying and Charles needs his help to try to save her. One of the things that we learn in the story is that Charles Jacobs is obsessed with electricity and how it works and how he can use it to his advantage in different gizmos and inventions that he has. One of those things we learned very early on is that he actually somehow brings back Jamie's brother's voice after his brother is in an accident and cannot speak. However, Charles even admits that some of what Conrad, Jamie's brother, had experienced was kind of psychosomatic in a way, but Jamie has never really believed it to be just that. He believed that Charles did something with the electricity and thinks that he is doing great things with it. So pretty much we follow Jamie as, like I said, he grows up, but he also is keeping tabs on Charles and what he's doing as he starts to kind of bring together a lot of people with his inventions and things of that nature and kind of starts to go off the deep end a little bit when it comes to that. This novel is really hard to explain in the most succinct manner because of the fact that this story, although it is told incredibly linearly from the time that Jamie is 5 years old to about his mid-50s, there's so much that goes on within this novel that it's hard to understand completely how to tell that to somebody else because there's so much that just is involved with the story that you don't even quite know how to express it. So I did like a few things with this novel. Don't get me wrong. I didn't absolutely hate it. It ended up being a 3 out of 5 stars for me. The things I really liked about it were that it was told in a linear fashion. I really liked that. I honestly am one that is really interested in learning about characters' lives and not really having much of a plot with it. The downside of that, though, is that there isn't much of a plot and it kind of makes things a little more gray, which is kind of why it's hard to talk about what exactly goes on because there's not really a plot to go with this. If anything though, there are actually some themes that I think are easier to try to explain, which are the concept of revivals, because there is a lot of different ways that revivals happen within the story, revivals of characterization, revivals of power, and even a little bit of some interesting demonic revivals going on within the story. Another thing that I think I really liked about this book is the consistency with Stephen King's use of suspense and his use of being able to keep a reader interested. Because pretty much throughout this entire book, you really don't know what the point is of knowing anything about Jamie's life and how he's connected to Charles and all this stuff and how he meets him these different times over his life. But it makes it so interesting to be able to read through it that it kind of propels you through the story. That being said though, again, I feel like this story kind of dragged on a little bit with the fact that there was no true plot to be discerned. And I will say the pacing of the story was kind of getting in a snail's pace sometimes. And while that's not a great thing, it also didn't distract me too much from the novel. I just felt like there were definitely some places that were a little slower than others. I do appreciate, though, Stephen King's ability to really flesh out Jamie as a guy, because especially as he gets older, you realize how truly complicated this guy is. And after he's gone through his heroin addiction and he changes his life around, there's a lot to be said about his true love for life and how he feels so dumb to have even become addicted to heroin in the first place. I will say the ending of this novel left me a little unsatisfied, though, and I think it's probably the biggest complaint I have about this entire novel, because while I do love Stephen's ability to build suspense and horror, especially towards the end, the horror aspect was really there. I really loved it. It was great. Very much what I've seen from Stephen King in the past in some of his older works. The ending of this one did not make a lot of sense. And I can't really explain why that is, because it really spoils the ending of this novel, and I think that it's something that you need to experience yourself. But I will just say, I think I was left with way more questions than answers than I would have liked to have. A lot of questions dealing with what the hell even happened in the scenes that ended the story, and a lot of questions as to what the fuck is gonna happen afterwards, like what is supposed to be happening later on, and a lot of questions about what the heck was Charles Jacobs even trying to accomplish. That's being as vague as possible with this story, and honestly, that, like I said, was probably the thing that I was really not a big fan of with this story, but overall it was kind of enjoyable. I did, like I said, really love reading through Jamie's story and learning about him and really understanding his fascination and kind of almost obsession with Charles since he was a child. There also are some supernatural elements that I really enjoyed within this novel, because Jamie experiences a lot of very strange, vivid dreams as he's sleeping that I was really interested in, and honestly, when I got towards the end of the novel, the dreams themselves made sense. But there's just a lot that I still don't really have clear answers to. And I feel like that's one thing about Stephen King, is that's a really big drawback for me, is I feel like half the time the endings of his stories, I'm like, I don't even know what just happened. How does all this tie together exactly? This is actually a much more recent novel of Stephen King's, by the way. This came out in 2014, which I was surprised by, because I feel like this writing style has definitely been refined in a way, but it still felt like a really older Stephen King story. Like, this felt like desperation in a lot of ways. So there you guys go. Those are all my thoughts that I am willing to share on Stephen King's Revival. Like I said, I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars. Wasn't awful, but definitely not one of my favorites of his. If you have read this for yourself and have some thoughts that you would like to share with me down in the comments below, please feel free to. I would love to hear other people's ideas on this and what they thought. Maybe you can answer some of my questions I have, because I feel like I'm so lost. And I think part of the problem is that Stephen King has so many books that all tie together, even if they're not a part of the same series, that I get so lost in the web of stories that are going on. Because, for instance, when I read Insomnia, I was not really invested in it. I didn't know what was going on, and then I later found out that Insomnia is actually tied to the Dark Tower series in a way, and then so is Hearts in Atlantis, which I read a long time ago and I really, really liked. That has to tie in with the Dark Tower series, apparently, and I just don't know how any of these stories all line up. So if you have any answers for me about this, please let me know, because I would really appreciate some help here with understanding what the heck is going on in here. But if you guys did enjoy this review anyway, please do give it a big thumbs up. And if you're not already and you'd like to be, hit that button down below and subscribe to become an owlet in our flock. And I will see all of you guys in my next video. Bye, guys.